What's up guys, it's Brandon again, and I am bringing you a War Thunder video today, and it's going to be of the B-24 Liberator, an American heavy bomber that is the highest level for the Americans, and it's a bomber that you hardly see out on the battlefield. And when we talk about this, we're going to kind of talk about why that is, why you don't see it out on the battlefield as much as, say, the B-17. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop some history on you guys about this thing, and it'll jump into that section about why not many people fly it, what it was designed for, and stuff along those lines. But here we go. The United States, the Army Air Corps basically needed a new bomber, so they approached Consolidated Aircraft about producing a new B-17. And this was a part of Project A program to basically expand American industry capacity. Now, the Consolidated President Reuben Fleet visited the Boeing plant in Seattle, Washington, to basically assess the Boeing B-17 and to see its capabilities and what he could improve upon it. Now, his decision came to the fact that America was in need of a modern bomber that could still use the technology that was already, say, in the B-17. Now, in January 1939, Consolidated began designing the new bomber under the USAAC specification C-212 program. This called for a bomber that had a higher speed, ceiling, as well as greater range than the B-17. Consolidated then started to create a high-winged monoplane that featured a deep fuselage with large bomb bays with retractable bomb bay doors. This also included tricycle landing gear. Now, the bomber was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin Wasp engines. The new aircraft also featured long wings to improve performance at high altitudes. So the B-24 was essentially a high-altitude bomber, and this basically also increased the payload. Now, after the plans were all said and done and laid out to the USAAC awarded Consolidated with a contract to produce a prototype. Now, on December 29, 1939, the XB-24 prototype took flight. The USAAC was so pleased with the test flight of the B-24 that they moved the production to the following year. Now, in the initial production in 1941, the B-24As were sold to the RAF, who soon found, however, that the B-24 was not suited for the combat over Britain, and this was due to the insufficient armament and it lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. So say if the fuel tanks took a hit, they would not self-seal and it would end up leaking fuel. Now, due to the heavy payload and long range, the British converted it to maritime patrols. And basically maritime patrols are just basically patrols of waterways. And we'll get into that later in the video about how the B-24 changed the course of the war in the Atlantic. Now, Consolidated then revised the aircraft again to the B-24D, which was a variant that was mass-produced and was ultimately the American version. Now, 2,738 of these aircrafts were produced, and the B-24 was also produced by North American Douglas and Ford under license agreements. Now, the B-24 first saw the conflicts in the European theater, but as I said, the Europeans' B-24As were not well equipped to face the Germans quite yet. Now enters the first bombing mission for the U.S. Now, this mission took place at Wake Island, but the B-24 did not show well and had a horrible impression for the first bombing mission that it had in the Pacific theater. Even though its first bombing mission was a fail, B-24s became the standard American bomber in the Pacific War. Now, this was a mix of B-24s and B-17s going to Europe. Operating over Europe, the B-24 became one of the principal aircraft employed in the Allies' combined bomber offensive against Germany. Now, while many B-24s were hitting hard in Europe, others were playing key roles in the Atlantic, flying from bases between Britain and Ireland, and this meant VLRs, a very long range. B-24s in the Atlantic also eliminated the U-boat threat. Now, remember back to what I was saying about maritime patrols, coastal patrols. This meant that B-24s were sinking U-boats, and they were credited with 72 U-boat kills. Now, wrapping this all up and going back to what I was saying at the very beginning of the video, why you don't see too many Liberators in the game, War Thunder actually got that right. Now, being a workhorse for the Allies' bombing offensive, it wasn't widely popular. The pilots often preferred the B-17 over the B-24, and this is because the B-24, and I can say this for first-hand accounts in the game, B-24s can't take a hit. There's been reports that during the war that B-24s would just fall out of the sky after just taking just minor hits, and they would just fall apart and the wings would buckle coming up, and it would resemble a butterfly flapping its wings. And the pilots and the crew gave the B-24 the nickname the Flying Coffin, because there was only one way out, and that was out the back of the plane. And this made it really hard for crews to escape the B-24 if it was crippled. The B-24 would also catch fire at times due to the hits that it would take, and this was because the fuel tanks were mounted in the upper parts of the fuselage, meaning they were the most exposed things. Pilots could shoot those and they would just start catching on fire. Now, despite all these issues, what people really don't know is the B-24 was actually the most used bomber for the US during World War II. People always mistake this for the B-17, thinking it is the most iconic bomber for the US, and mostly the Liberator is usually overshadowed by that. But altogether, the Liberator was a great bomber, even though it was unsuccessful at first. Now, transferring this over to Gaijin logic and War Thunder logic, War Thunder mainly portrays this thing in the correct way, even though there is some minor tweaking that needs to be done with it. Now, if you enjoy the historical facts of the B-24, and it's such an amazing plane when you're flying this thing around, it's just like a giant boat. It feels like you're flying a boat with wings, and it's just an amazing plane. But if you're looking at this thing trying to decide whether or not you want to get it as a moneymaker, if you want to get it as, you know, just to shoot planes down that are on your ass, I don't recommend it. I recommend that you stick to your B-17s and you just keep flying those. Because the Liberator, it's so off and on whether or not you're going to have a good game. It just really depends on who you're flying with. If you're flying with a squad that's going to escort you to the battle, then I highly recommend it. But it's really just who you're playing with and the type of maps you get. Now, if you're throwing this thing up against the Japanese, it's a really great plane. And that goes for the B-17 as well. It's just because, of course, the Japs are more or less made of paper, and if you're going up against the Germans, they're a bit more intimidating. But the reason why I say watch out for this thing is because the tail is just so big and bulky, and that is mainly where I always get criticaled and shot down. The tail just goes black and my plane just nosedives straight into the ground. This happens more in the Liberator than it does to me in the B-17, so that's why I'm saying just watch out. If you're wanting people to get on your tail and shoot them down, don't really plan on getting any kills very often with this thing. Now, despite the flaws with the B-24 Liberator, it is an amazing bomber to fly and is really good at what it does. So, thanks for watching, guys. My name's Brendan. I hope you found this video informative about the Liberator, and don't let me discourage you from buying it. It is a really amazing plane. So, again, thanks for watching, guys. My name's Brendan. Hope you have a nice day.